Thanksgiving break? Hope you had a good one. Anybody able to not put on weight this break? Holy cow. I blamed it on my daughter. I said, honey, since you've been home, I put on 6 pounds. What's wrong with you? Put a lot of cooking, a lot of going out, and stuff like that, you know. So hopefully you all had a good break. So just trying to remind you what's going on in this class. Obviously, you saw I graded your tests. Okay. Take a look at those sometime this week. I mean, as a class, you guys did really well. I mean, not everybody did great, but as a class. We're going to finish this war and take a test, and then we've got 2 sections that we'll do together, kind of Cold War. I'll get into the Korean War, NATO, the Vietnam War, Civil Rights Movement before Christmas. I'm going to hit all that, okay? So we got work to do. Other than that, you know, you got your interviews there before Christmas. Think about that. And I don't know if there was anybody in here that asked me about doing a battle instead. Here, like, got an idea of somebody to interview. Okay, if not, better get on that. Okay. Okay. So as far as this class goes, guys, we just won the Battle of North Africa. Remember, we captured 250,000 Germans. Yes. Okay. The U.S. First Army that entered North Africa was under General Friedendahl. After we got beat at Kasserine Pass, General George Patton was put in charge of the U.S. First Army. Okay, and I wanted to go through with you guys a little bit on the chain of command. This slide is not in your notes that I put on Canvas because I added it to the notes this morning. Okay, but as you can see, you've got the British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, who is also the Minister of Defense, President of the United States, who is also the Commander-in-Chief. Okay, and then these are your top staff for your head of the Army, head of the Navy, head of the Army Air Corps, Hap Arnold, George Marshall, head of the Army. He is actually, after the war, he actually becomes more famous because he becomes Secretary of State, and we will name a major plan after the war called the Marshall Plan, after George Marshall. Okay, remember after World War I, where we, well, the Allies punished Germany for the war. Okay, we're not going to do that again. In fact, we're going to invest in Europe after the war to help them get back on their feet, which will in turn help us. Okay, so we're going to behave very differently under Marshall after the war. Here's where the rubber meets the road. These are the guys in charge of the day-to-day affairs of the military. Now, guys, there's a lot of different troops that are going to be coming to fight from different countries. Obviously, the Allies include the British, the Americans. The Soviets have their fight in the East, yes. But if you think about who else is going to come fight on our side, really look at the British Commonwealth of Nations. So, guys, you're going to see troops from India. You're going to see troops from New Zealand. You're going to see troops from South Africa, Canada, Scotland. Okay. Now, who's going to provide more troops than anybody else? The United States. So we're going to put an American in charge of the Allied forces. Okay. So this is the Supreme Headquarters of the Allied Expeditionary Force, Supreme Commander Dwight David Eisenhower of Atchison, Kansas. Yes. All right. Now, Eisenhower was not the highest ranking general, but Roosevelt chose him because of his people skills. Okay. And he had to work with all these different allies, okay, and try and keep them happy while we're fighting this war. We've also got the Free French, okay, and they're kind of a pain in the ass, but, you know, they're there, okay. Now, under these are all Americans here, Deputy Commander, Chief of Staff, Deputy Chief of Staff. Now, this is what I want to point out here. This 21st Army Group, which will include British and American troops, our armies, both of our armies, is led by General Bernard Montgomery. Now, who is that? Where's he from? He's British. Okay, now take a look at this. U.S. First Army Commander Omar Bradley reports to Montgomery. Now, guys, this is June 6, 1944. We're not there yet. Actually, running the First Army is who? I just mentioned his name. Patton, George S. Patton, okay? Patton doesn't like reporting to Monty, who's British. In fact, none of our generals really like reporting to Monty because Monty is an ego guy and he wants the glory for the British troops. So when he's making the decisions about where troops go are sent in these invasions and so forth, well, Monty's in charge of that. So the American generals get pissed. They're like, this guy's screwing us. He's going to get all the glory. We're not going to get any of the glory. So Patton and Monty butt heads. In fact, guys, we have ourselves a genuine testosterone contest here. Or in other words, excuse my French, a pissing contest between these two men. Okay? Have you heard of this before? Ladies, I don't know. When these guys were younger, when we were younger, we were kids, we used to see who could pee the furthest. Okay? I don't know if you guys ever did that. Me and my friends did that. I mean, like, you could put, on the roof, man, like, shoot it. Okay? It's juvenile, right? But this juvenile competition between Monty and Patton is actually going to pay some dividends here, as you're going to see when we go into Sicily. Okay? Monty's in charge. Patton is an egomaniac. Now, Patton believes that he has been reincarnated for this moment in history. I'm not making this up. Okay? So he expects to be the hero. So let's look at what happens. Okay? So we're in North Africa. We defeat the Germans there. So just go back to this map real quick, okay? So in Tunisia, this is where we capture the Germans. So the next likely step is Sicily, the world's largest amphibious landing in the history of the world, okay? Will take place in Sicily, okay? Now, the Brits are going to land here, British 8th Army. The Americans are going to land here, the U.S. Army, First Army, okay, under Patton. Now, they generally feel like the Italian and German forces on Sicily are likely to retreat back to the high ground. So this is a topographical map. The darker the shade of red, the higher the mountain is, okay? This is Mount Etna, a volcanic mountain, okay? And in fact, that's kind of what happens. We expect them to fall back, and they do. But when Monty draws this up, look at the path that the British 8th Army has to Mount Etna. Patton in the U.S. First Army has to go clear Sicily of Italians and Germans, okay, and then meet Monty at the Etna line. Well, Monty's going to get there first, right? I mean, you would think. Patton wants the glory. So when the American troops land in Sicily, they are going full steam ahead. Okay, Patton is like, we are going to wade through the enemy, destroy them, and keep moving. Keep moving. Guess who's going to get to the Etna line first? Patton will be there waiting on Montgomery when he gets there. Like, hey, what took you so long? I mean, really, look, this isn't very mountainous here. Look at all this out here. All he's got to go is here. Patton wins the race. Patton wants the glory, okay? So, guys, the U.S. First Army under Patton is an unstoppable machine, okay? He has got them a well-oiled machine right here, okay? And the Germans are like, damn, okay? So they fall back, and guys, by this time, Italy, they're like, we didn't really bargain for this. We don't like this. So they're going to force Mussolini to resign. He's going to be arrested. And Italy's going to drop out of the war. Okay? Now, Mussolini is jailed. And they will move him to several different jails over the next couple of years. What they're trying to prevent is the Germans from rescuing him. Because Hitler wants Mussolini back in power. He wants the Italians fighting on their side. Okay? So the Italians are hiding him. So Hitler can't find him. Well, the Germans find him. And they're trying to get Mussolini to take back over Italy, but nobody wants to follow Mussolini. So near the end of the war, Mussolini's going to try and escape Italy. He's wearing a German uniform. He's trying to escape to Switzerland in the north. He will be spotted. And he will be captured. He'll be taken to Milan in the north. He'll be shot between the eyes. His body will be dragged through the streets behind an automobile. And then his body will be hung in a town square. So people can pay their last respects to Il Duce. Now you'll notice there's somebody hanging next to him. That would be his mistress, who decided to stay with him through the end of the war. She suffered the same fate. Okay. It's a pretty gruesome photograph. Okay. But that happened in late 1945 or mid 45. Okay. So the Germans and the Italians fall back, and then they escape to the toe of Italy. Okay, most of them. All right. So we start laying out a plan for the invasion of Italy. Okay. Any of you guys been to Italy? Okay. You got to put that on your bucket list. Like, obviously, as Catholics, you might want to go to Rome, go to the Vatican. Okay. But nothing else. The food in Italy is the best food in the world as far as I've tasted. I've tasted food on many continents, but Italy is the best. Okay. So let's look at Italy. Actually, right before we get to that, I put this slide together real quick. This is for the invasion of Sicily. So this is mostly carried out with the Royal Navy. This is the U.S. Navy here in green. Okay, 250,000 men. You've got big ships like this. You've got large landing craft like this for such a large force. Okay, and then this picture up here, this map shows evacuations and then invasions and landings. So this kind of shows you when the war turns in our favor. So all of these evacuations, you guys remember Dunkirk, like where the British and French troops were on the coast. And they saved them, okay? West coast of France, British Somaliland, Greece, Crete. And then after the Japanese attack in the Philippines and Malaya, the evacuations in Southeast Asia. Now, you come to May of 42, you have the invasion of Madagascar, which is an island off of Africa. And then Operation Torch, that's where we landed in North Africa. Husky is Sicily. Avalanche and Shingle are both in Italy. That's Salerno and Anzio, and I'll show you where those are. And then the big one, Operation Overlord, which is D-Day, the beaches of Normandy, France. Okay, June 6, 1944. So you see the tide turn, okay, about mid-42. You start to see things improve and pick up for us. Okay, still got a long way to go. All right, so once we landed in Sicily, it took 11 months to get to Rome. Okay, this is some of the heaviest fighting of the war in Italy. Okay, so here's a good map of Italy. If you go to Italy, here's Rome. Okay. Venice is up here, which, guys, if you're there, you might as well go to Venice. Okay. It's one of the most beautiful places you'll ever visit. It's all canals. You know what you guys seen pictures of Venice, Italy? Know what I'm talking about? There's no roads. It's just like sidewalks and canal. You get around by boat or walking. A lot of walking. But it's unbelievable. And then there's some really cool islands off the coast of Venice that you can visit where they do glass blowing and make different types of glass products and stuff like that. Some really, really old churches and stuff like that. Okay, so when I was there just a few years ago with my family, we did a 9-day tour of Italy with a group. We started in Venice, okay? And our tour guide asked us, said, is there anything that's not on, because every day is kind of planned out for you. Is there anything that you want to do that's not on our list? And we had a Vietnam vet. And he said, well, I'd like to see something, that pertains to World War II in Italy, if possible. And she said, okay. She didn't tell us anything. But when we were taking a bus from Venice to Florence, which is in the middle country. Now, guys, in the middle part of this is the wine country, Tuscany. It's, it's hills and mountains and vineyards. It's absolutely gorgeous, guys. And again, the food is, you can't describe it. But Florence is where they have a bunch of museums. The Statue of David, famous Statue of David in Florence. So on our way down to Florence, we actually stopped. And she took us to this cemetery. This is an American cemetery in Italy. Now, I've been to the one in Normandy, France, which is huge. I didn't even know this existed. So I'll tell you about that in a minute. But yeah, guys, Italy, you're going to see the British are going to cross here at the toe and over here. Americans will land here. This is at Salerno and later up here at Anzio. The next map shows that pretty good. Here's Anzio, here's Rome, okay, and here's Salerno. This is the first place the American troops will land in Italy, okay? Now you can see based on this topographical map, guys, that Italy is mountainous and it's hilly. They have 4 seasons like we do. There's the rainy season, the cold season, and so forth. So, guys, the Germans are not just going to pack up and go home when Italy drops out of the war. No, guys, the Germans are going to defend Italy for the remainder of the war. The fighting in Italy will last up until Victory in Europe Day, until VE Day, until Germany surrenders. Okay? And the Germans will have the high ground with 23 divisions, artillery, mortars, 88 millimeter flat guns, machine guns. Okay, this is going to be very bloody for the Americans. We will take Rome, liberate Rome, on June 5th, 1944. Big celebration. Okay, the Italians are grateful to be rid of Mussolini and the Nazis. But all the way up here, guys, there's a million stories of things that happened. You know what I mean? Like the fighting through there. Okay, I know a couple of them, and I want to share some of that with you guys. Okay, how many of you guys have ever heard of a person named Bob Dole? Bob Dole? Kind of say it as one word. Bob Dole. Like Al Gore. Al Gore. Bob Dole. Bob Dole. You have not heard of Bob? Huh? Huh? You heard of him? Bob Dole? He was born in Russell, Kansas. You guys know where Russell is? You know where Hayes, Kansas is? You ever drive to Colorado? Past Russell, Kansas. Okay. It's about 15 miles before you get to Hayes. You're way out to Colorado on I-70. And they have a big sign out there that says, Russell, Kansas, home to 2 U.S. senators, Bob Dole and a guy named Arlen Specter, who actually represented Pennsylvania in the Senate. Okay? But Bob Dole was born in Russell, Kansas. And when Pearl Harbor happened, he volunteered for the U.S. Army. Okay? And he was sent to Italy. Bob Dole's a famous Kansas, obviously, because he's a senator, right? But when Bob Dole was fighting in Italy, a mortar round went off about 6 feet from where he was standing. It hit the right side of his body, was basically hit with shrapnel. Okay? And he was badly wounded. In fact, he almost bled out. He spent 6 months in the hospital recovering. Now, they had field hospitals there, okay? So I've got 3 stories to share with you about field hospitals in Italy. First one pertains to Bob Dole. Now, when Bob Dole spent 6 months recovering from these wounds, he would not be able to go back into combat because he would not fully recover from those wounds the rest of his life, okay? Now, while he was laying in that hospital bed in Italy, he'd tell anybody that would listen to him, when he get back to Kansas, he's going to run for Congress. Okay? Now, you got to be 25 years old to run for Congress. So when he was 25, he ran for the House of Representatives and was elected and reelected. And then he ran for the United States Senate. And he was elected to represent the state of Kansas and Washington, D.C. and reelected and reelected and reelected and reelected. And at one point in the late 80s and early 1990s, he became the Senate Majority Leader, which is the most powerful person in the United States Senate representing the state of Kansas. Okay? It's nice to have friends in high places. Have any of you guys ever been up to, what's that small town northwest of here where the Kansas Cosmos Fair is? Hutchinson, Kansas. Nowheresville, Kansas. They built a space center there. Right? Why would you build a space center in the middle of Nowhereville, Kansas? With some of the greatest space artifacts in the world. I got 2 words for you. Bob Dole. Bob Dole brought home the bacon. You know, it cost millions of dollars to build that place, right? Well, he was the most powerful man in the Senate. And he brought home some money, put a space center in Hutchinson, Kansas, of all places. Right? I mean, something like that you'd think would be in Houston, you know, where NASA is, or Cape Canaveral, where they launched the rockets. No, Hutch, Kansas. Bob Dole. Now, Bob Dole ran for president in 1996, receiving the Republican Party's nomination for president. He ran against Bill Clinton, who was running for re-election in 96. Obviously, you would know Bob Dole's name if he had won. He lost. Okay? Now, Bob Dole's a politician. So what do politicians do when they're campaigning? They go out and shake hands and kiss babies, right? Well, Bob Dole always carried a pen in his right hand. Never seen him without. Because he couldn't shake your hand with his right hand. Because of those injuries he sustained in Italy. Never regained use of his right hand again. So he would do this. How you doing? Bob Dole. Good to meet you. Bob Dole, how are you? Bob Dole, nice to meet you. Okay. He's one of our greatest Kansas. Okay, Bob Dole. All right. Now, in a related story, some of you guys did the last homework assignment, some of you didn't. There was a question about an executive order that Roosevelt gave during the war dealing with Japanese Americans. You guys know what happened to the Japanese Americans on the west coast of the United States? They were placed in camps, internment camps, yes? Everybody know about this? See how you know about this? Yeah, you know about this? Okay. So guys, most of these Japanese folks are U.S. citizens. Yes? There's something called habeas corpus that says in order for somebody to detain you, they have to charge you with a crime. Yet these people were not charged with a crime. We were in a crisis. We suspended habeas corpus, rounded up Japanese Americans, taking them out of their homes, out of their businesses, and putting them in camps. As I said, most of these people are U.S. citizens. Some of them were immigrants that were not citizens. Okay? Now, who was president to sign this executive order? Roosevelt, right? You guys remember studying the New Deal? Okay, Roosevelt, guys, is one of the most liberal presidents we've ever had in U.S. history. You follow me? Now, liberals today, these bleeding heart people, like everybody's a victim. We got to help people, Yeah. So for the fact that this was a Democratic president that did this, and the governor of California at the time that helped Roosevelt do this was a guy named Earl Warren. Earl Warren would go on to become the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court from 1954 to 1965. Very liberal Chief Justice. Like the most liberal period in our court's history. Earl Warren asked later in life if he would round up the Japanese Americans and put them in camps if he had to do it over again. You know what he said? I would. Guys, people were scared. This decision was made out of fear. The Japanese had just hit us at Pearl. And we didn't have defenses on the West Coast to defend our nation. There was a fear that the Japanese would invade the West Coast of the United States, and that Japanese Americans would be more loyal to their emperor god, than to the United States. So as we did this, guys, many people lost their homes, they lost their businesses, they would stay there for the rest of the war. And then the U.S. government had the gall to go into those camps and say to the young men, hey, we need soldiers. We need people to fight. Would you go fight for the country that has your family locked up behind these barbed wire walls? You know what? Yeah, go fight for our country. So they put together an entire regiment of Japanese Americans called the 442nd Regiment. Okay? Now, obviously, they're not going to send these guys to the Pacific. Okay? They send them to Italy. Okay? The 442nd Regiment becomes the most decorated regiment of the entire war. Now, how do you win decorations in war? Huh? Yeah, you die for your country, they just give those medals to your family, right? But if you get wounded, you get a Purple Heart, right? You get some extra medals for doing things that uncommon valor, going above and beyond the call of duty. They have medals for that. This is the most decorated regiment of the war. These guys fought with a chip on their shoulder, trying to prove to the American people that they loved this country and they were willing to fight and die for it. One of those guys was a captain. His name was Daniel Inoue. Okay, he was from Hawaii. He's Japanese American from Hawaii, and he volunteered to join the Army. Okay, now guys, I'm going to read this to you. Okay, and kind of act it out a little bit as I read it to you. All right, about Daniel Inoue's story. The war ends May 8th. So basically about 3 weeks before this happens. Inoue was grievously wounded while leading an assault on a heavily defended ridge near San Terenzo in Tuscany, Italy. Now, guys, listen. Rome liberated on June 5th, 1944. What happens on June 6th, 1944? D-Day, the invasion of France. So the world's attention moves away from Italy to France. But guys, the fighting in Italy lasted the entirety of the war, like in the north of Italy. A lot of people don't pay attention to because of what's happening in France. Okay? This is called the Calle Mustala. The ridge served as a strong point of German fortifications known as the Gothic Line, the last and most unyielding line of German defensive works in Italy. He led his platoon in a flanking maneuver as 3 German machine guns opened fire from covered positions 40 yards away. Now, I want you to transport yourself out to the football stadium and stand on the goal line looking 40 yards, and you got 3 machine gun nests pinning you down 40 yards away. You stand up, you're going to get shot at. Pinning his men to the ground, Inoue stood up to attack with shot in the stomach. Ignoring his wound, he proceeded to attack the first and destroy the first machine gun nest with hand grenades and his Thompson submachine gun. When informed of the severity of his wound, he refused treatment and rallied his men for an attack on the second machine gun post, which he successfully destroyed before collapsing from blood loss. Laying there on the ground, he woke up. As his squad distracted the third machine gunner, Inoue crawled toward the final bunker, coming within 10 yards. As he raised himself up and cocked his arm to throw his last grenade, a German soldier inside the bunker fired a rifle grenade, which struck his right elbow, nearly severing most of his arm and leaving his prime, which means he's already pulled the pin on his grenade, prime grenade reflexively clenched in a fist that suddenly didn't belong to me anymore, to quote Inoue. Inoue's horrified soldiers moved to his aid, but he shouted for them to stay back out of fear that his severed fist would involuntarily relax, and kill his men. Okay. While the German inside the bunker reloaded his rifle, Inoue pried the live grenade from his useless right hand, transferred to his left. As the enemy soldier aimed his rifle at him, Inoue tossed the grenade into the bunker, destroyed it. He stumbled to his feet, continued forward, silencing the last German resistance with a one-handed, left-handed burst from his Thompson machine gun, before being wounded in the leg and tumbling unconscious to the bottom of the ridge. He awoke to see his worried men of his platoon hovering over him. His only comment before being carried away was he ordered them back to their position, saying, "Nobody called off the war." Now, that had a lot of witnesses. That will get you the Congressional Medal of Honor, which is hard to win. Most people get it posthumously. You understand? Daniel Inoue had to go to the hospital. And when he got into his hospital bed after surgeries, in the bed next to him was Bob Dole. Bob Dole talked about running for Congress when he got back to Kansas, yes? This put a bug in Daniel Inoue's ear. Daniel said, well, maybe I'll do that when I get back to Hawaii. Maybe I'll run for Congress. Now, Inoue was actually able to go back into combat. Okay? He recovered from his injuries, but the war was over. Okay? So Inoue, when he turned 25, he ran for the House of Representatives in Hawaii, and then later ran for the Senate. Was elected, re-elected, re-elected again, re-elected again, re-elected again. And at one point, Daniel Inouye became the Senate President pro tempore, which is the longest serving member of the majority party, Democratic Party in this case, in the Senate, where he served alongside his bedmate, Bob Dole, for more than 30 years. One a Republican and one a Democrat. That's a good story. Okay. Daniel Inouye passed away a few years ago, and Bob Dole passed away last year. Okay. Two American heroes. All right. So, when our tour guide surprised us, she didn't even tell us we were stopping at this cemetery. There's a caretaker there, the guy that's in charge of the cemetery. And of course, I'm a history teacher, right? So I'm like all over this guy, asking him questions, okay? Because I've been to the American Cemetery in Normandy, and I didn't even know this one existed. And I'm like, I want to know what's going on, okay? And he said Bob Dole had actually been there to this cemetery to visit. Now, I did a close-up of this one, okay? Grover G. Lynn, Staff Sergeant, 473rd Infantry Regiment, Kansas, died April 17th, 1945, 3 weeks before the war ended. So families of American GIs that die overseas get the option. You can bring their sons home and have them buried in the United States locally, or if they're maybe a hero of some sort, they're all heroes, but maybe in Arlington, okay? Or they can have them buried where they die, where they lay. About a third of the Americans that died in the Northern Campaign in Italy are here. About a third, okay? It's very well kept, you understand. Like, they take great care of this place, as they do in Normandy, France. Okay. We have American cemeteries in a lot of different countries, okay, including places like South Korea, okay, where there are American cemeteries. So this is always very sobering to walk amongst these graves and to hear the stories of some of these men. And as we got to the top of the monument, they had all these names up here. And this was pretty shocking to me. I didn't know this, but I told you this story the other day. We were talking about the Burma Road, the aluminum highway, where we lost a lot of planes and missing in action. We never found those guys. All of these names are missing in action in Italy. Almost all of them are from bombing crews, from bombers, from the air war, okay? Now, occasionally you'll see a little star. That means that since this monument was built, they have found the remains of these individuals. Like, so, an Italian guy digging a garden in his backyard. Hits something. It's human remains. And so they do the DNA testing and try and find out who the person was. Okay? So these individuals have been found. The rest have not been found. Okay? So let me just read a couple of these. Andrew Schmidt, 2nd Lieutenant, 759th Bomber Squadron, 459 Bomber Group, Pennsylvania. Okay. Harry Scott, Sergeant, 514th Bomber Squadron, 376th Bomber Group, New Hampshire, and so on and so on. Okay. So that was a really kind of interesting thing to see. There's a whole wall of them, you know what I mean? Like, that we haven't found. And then this beautiful map here. So Rome is actually down here, this part of the war, okay? And this shows like the different American companies that fought. So you got the 10th Mountain Division here, the Buffalo Soldiers here, okay, 5th Armored Division, and so forth. I don't know if that's 15th Airborne, and so forth, okay? So, like I said, the fighting in here is very mountainous. The Germans have the high ground, and it's very bloody, okay? So what we end up with today, I want to show you a video from that same series I've been showing. You might remember Richard Tregaskis. He was the guy that was in the Guadalcanal with the troops, the Marines that were stuck on the island, okay? He has left Guadalcanal. Now he's in Europe or North Africa, and he's headed to the front in Sicily and Italy. And so he tells his story, and it kind of tells the story of a lot of guys just telling his story. So, actually, I'm going to pause this because YouTube will not let me post this with that video in it. So stop recording.